I just like this caricature. This is so lovely.
That's
And I'm very,
brilliant.
very happy to welcome you, dear friends, joining us, and Asim as well, to this Smashing Hour. Like, for those of you who don't know what it is, it's a very informal thing. It's, us getting together, hanging out, talking about meaning of life, trying to find answers to questions that bother us all, and talk to interesting, exciting, smart, intelligent, passionate, experienced, and knowledgeable. Oh wow, this is like, and I had too much coffee, I think, at this point. People who have some stories to tell, who can share things. But the most important part about it is that you can ask any questions that you like at any time, preferably in the chat, so I can look at it and moderate, and Asim can answer these questions as well. And just for everyone to kind of to be on the same boat, so Asim is the director of green software at Intel. He's executive director and chairperson of the Green Software Foundation. He's a really good person in many different ways, but also a published author and a very passionate teacher. And most recently, for the last like what 78 years, being very curious about sustainability and how can we make or create products that are more sustainable on the web. And I kind of really want to dive in at this point because to me, Asim, I think there's a bit of
Mm,
confusion across the industry because we often think that when it comes to sustainability, it often feels like it's a technical problem. Like you need to optimize images,
mm,
you need to optimize delivery, you need to reduce waste, you need to make sure that you don't have waste, right,
mm, mm,
on the page or in your code base and stuff like that. And I often feel like many people are very confused what it actually means for them. So if you are a designer, if you're a
mm,
product manager, if you are, I don't know, UX researcher, what does sustainability mean to you? Or maybe to start off, what does
mm.
sustainability mean to you, Asim?
Ah, okay. So it's kind of interesting because this well, and I won't say the space is evolving. I suppose I'm evolving as well in terms of my experience and my knowledge and my feelings around this space also. So when I think about sustainability previously, it was oftentimes talking about climate change and carbon emissions and things like that. But actually I'm evolving and the space is evolving to even think about other aspects of things as well, like water and water security and other things as well, because these all have impacts. And in fact, kind of the way we talk about it in terms of the foundation is that there should be zero harmful environmental effects from using software. So that's one of the ways I think about it, is the fact that you know it really shouldn't be a choice for the end user of your product whether they should be doing something green or not green, or they should there should be a concern for somebody who's visiting a website. What is the impact that my visit is happening on the planet? That should already be green. It should already be optimized. There should already be no harmful environmental effects at all from doing any of those activities. That's one of the things it means to me, is that um, it's not something that you offload onto the end user. It's your responsibility, and it's responsibility of kind of going up the chain as well. When I specifically talk about carbon, though, these days, it's very much around this idea of carbon efficiency, which is, it gets confusing because in the climate, everybody wants to talk about zero carbon and all this other stuff. But at the end of the day, everything we do emits carbon. It always emits carbon, and we just have to accept that. And so, as soon as you accept that, then you start asking yourself a different question, which is like, well, I'm doing X. Can I do X and emit less carbon at the same time?
Mhm.
And then you can ask different questions, which is, do I need to do X in the first place? That's where kind of the user experience and that whole part and product management and that whole part of the equation kind of fits into there as well. Because oftentimes when you're a developer, you don't even question the features coming your way. And then your question is, how do I implement those features as green as possible? You're asking me, what is a UX and a product? What are they doing? Well, you should be asking yourself the question, are there ways of designing and fundamentally designing this functionality or this user experience or this user journey in a way which by default is in some way emits less carbon into the atmosphere and things like that. So I think there's, once you start thinking about it in terms of just minimizing carbon per user value, not just a function, but the value you're giving to a user, then I think it opens the doors to a lot of other people being part of the conversation and feeling included and knowing they have something to do and they have some way to add to this add to the space. But yeah, I would just say that like everything we do causes harm to the environment. We just want to do it so it just causes less harm.
That's hard.
But that's it, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think at this point it would be interesting also for us to maybe explore it for all the wonderful people who are joining us today, and of course people who are going to watch this later. Did you ever work on a project, or have you worked recently on a project which in some way involved considerations about sustainability? And if it did, can you just write plus in the chat? And if not, minus. The reason why I'm asking this question is because I feel like there is a tremendous shift happening right now. And it's very much based on what you are saying, Asim. Because I remember vividly the times when we were thinking about accessibility as this fringe on the web, which affects a very small portion of people.
Yeah.
Like these people, and this is what I would hear in meetings. These people who are using screen readers, why should we care about them? Shouldn't we care about the majority of people? This has tremendously changed, of course, over the last years, and I cannot imagine a single project today that would not involve, at least at some sense, the notion of accessibility. Just not happening anymore. And it feels like in many ways something similar seems to be happening, at least in my experience, to sustainability too. And that's kind of just going to check in the chat. That not yet, right? But this is kind of an interesting thing that really happened to me recently. Some of you might not know that obviously, like we are working on Smashing Magazine, but there are also many other things that we do along the way as well. And one of the things that I'm involved with at this point, and I've been involved for the last like 1.5 years, is this big project with the European Parliament, where the idea is very much similar, very similar to what Gov.uk did, right? Trying to transform this plethora of different websites into one coherent digital experience. That's a massive project because it's, everything that lives inside of European Parliament available in 24 languages. It's like a lot of data, just a lot of data. And the ambition that we have is to create the most sustainable digital experience. So when I come in and when we are discussing any design discussions, I have to look at it through the lens of sustainability. And it's really hard because I have no idea where to start. I just don't know. Like, what does it mean? So if I move pixel over there, or over here, does it make a change? Does it change anything? And I was wondering, Asim, so from your end, how do you kick off or initiate the conversation about sustainability? So where do you start? Do you have any, I don't know, frameworks for decision making that you're using or anything? Where would you kick off?
I'll always like caveat and preface everything that I say in terms of like this field is like at such an early stage that things change so fast. So things I say that are true now won't be true in 6 months' time, and kind of the frameworks can change. But like the way things are evolving a lot, and I would say at the current moment in time, what I'm about to say is mostly me being at the fulcrum of a lot of different conversations and being able to see patterns, which other people might not be able to see, just because I'm just involved in so many conversations. And one of the things I realized several months ago was, every single project successful, like very large, I'm talking multi-million-dollar, very large scale project that had been successful in the green software space, I'd seen have three factors, and I predict that there's a fourth factor that which is more what I'm going to push. But I call it the 4 M's of green software, because people love. I've been very successful by naming something, a number, and something else in my career. So this is the 4 M's. Let's give this one a go. Let's stick to it then. And I actually also believe this is how a lot of engagements around green software and sustainability in software is going to start in the future. I'll say what the forums are in a second. And also, there's a lot of interest in the foundation has a lot of consultancies. So there's a lot of organizations, because a lot of consultants are getting asked a lot of questions from their customers around the same question. So a lot of interest from consultancies as well involved in kind of the project, and there's 4 M's. So what are the 4 M's? First one is we call mapping. So when someone comes to you and say, look, I'm interested in the sustainability of my application, the first question you should ask is, what is an application? What are you measuring? Because you know, a lot of times when I'm speaking to organizations, they're like, look, pause. I care end to end. Stop talking to me about like the slice of the servers on my server side, which you can talk to me about because you have knowledge of. No, look, I've got a product which has a database and it has users using a website. I want to know the end-to-end impact of everything. So the first thing you got to do is you got to map, like what when you talk a user journey, a user thing, what is everything that touches? All of it, top to bottom. So that's the first thing is mapping. There's mapping the boundary of a piece of software. What are you including, what you're not including? The second step is measuring. Now, for each of those different components that you touch, you need to actually calculate a value. You need to calculate the impact of what it's having in the world. And that's incredibly hard right now. But there are several models that are being built. There's a CO2JS from my colleague, Chris Adams, the Green Web Foundation. There's things from ThoughtWorks, Cloud Carbon Footprint. There's a number of others that are being built that I have insight into. So for everything that you're decided as part of the application, you want to measure it. And for each one of them, you're going to need to use a different model. And there's going to require a little bit of expertise there to figure it out. The models are going to have to get more advanced because, you know, in the web space, I think it's kind of interesting because all the models right now are based around this idea that all that really matters is the bandwidth, is the size of the bundle that comes down. But some interesting questions are being asked around, well, some bytes are different to other bytes. Like, is a JavaScript byte the same as an image byte? Is a JavaScript an image byte? Is that the same as like a video byte? You know, like should you be looking at the data that's coming down the pipeline differently? And I think that's where things are gonna evolve a little bit there. So that's the measurement piece. Once you've kind of got that picture together and you've worked with a customer and you said this is you want to measure your application, this is what we're measuring. This is how we're measuring the models that we're using. Then you get to the really interesting stage, which is simulation, because you want that model. So then you can say to them, well, if we did X, I've got a model, and I can say like if I did X, this the emissions would go down by Y. You really want to get to that simulation stage. You want to get to that stage where you've modeled what they've got, so you can say, well, if we optimize this piece of code or this situation, or we moved your service to this region, or we tried this out, I can demonstrate to you with a number, this is the impact of your investment. I've seen projects kind of get off the ground and get some little bit of investment without this. But if you really want to get to the significant investment, if you want to get like the senior leadership of your organization to go, okay, fine, allocate millions or whatever it is, you've got to get to that simulation phase. You've got to get to that point where you're proving to them, you know, if you give me X resources, I will deliver you Y. And that's why this simulation comes along. And the fourth simulation is it begins with S, but
That's a bit of a cheating.
it's a bit of cheating. But I couldn't think of my only other M was maybe
modeling, maybe.
Yeah, we're using modeling for something else. But yeah, anyway, simulation. The last M is a real M. It's monitoring, and this is kind of like a big bugbear for me. And this is where like the real cutting edge of this space is that oftentimes you're measuring the stuff, you're measuring it once for a customer or client, and then you're done, or you're measuring it once and then you're doing something, you're measuring it again. Where the real future in this space is real time. Like we're not even every day right now, we're every year. So let's get down to every month, let's get down to every day, let's get down to every minute. Can you see the carbon emissions of your entire product changing? Every time you make a code change, can you see the emissions go down a little bit? Monitoring is this kind of future state that you get to, because then if you're engaging with a customer, you like they've given you some money, you're implementing something, and once you've got monitoring in place, you can show them, hey, look, in month 1 we did all this work and I've shown you how the emissions have gone down. You need to get to that point, but to get real investment and real money and kind of real support in a project. That's the 4 M's. Yeah.
Right. That's interesting because actually what what's really surprising to me as well, and this is kind of really maps nicely with what you have been describing with the steps 2 and with the second and the third M, right? Uh, what we learned is that actually and this is something I have never thought about at all. It's like one of the main goals is obviously we can reduce the number of bytes, right? We can optimize the hell out of our CSS and JavaScript and images and videos and all of that, and they will have different weights, right? Because you have some processing that needs to happen with JavaScript that does not have to happen with HTML,
Yeah.
and so on, right?
Yeah.
But then one thing that was really surprising to me is that what we actually have to think about is the consumption of this. Because if you think about, let's say, I don't know, let's take a CNN.com, for example. I don't know, bazinga of billions, millions of visitors every month. Maybe 20 million, maybe 30, maybe 40, I don't know. All of them will come to the website with a device.
Yes.
That device might be something like a secondary screen. It might be a 4K screen, it might be a 5K screen, it might be whatever, and they will consume energy, right? And so if they have to spend 2 more minutes to complete their task on that site, and if 20 million people or 30 million people do that, I mean, okay, CNN is maybe not a good idea, but let's say government project like WK or any other thing.
Like a government's lot of forms filling out, things like
a lot of forms.
time.
Like if we could speed up the time people need to spend on that website by 2 minutes, they can have a tremendous impact as well on carbon emissions, right? Which are outside of our universe of kind of the website. And that all relates to, you know, how much effort needs to put in and how much carbon emission have to happen for this wonderful screen to exist and for that laptop to exist and to run power and all of that. And I think that we all kind of experimenting. We're still kind of trying to figure out what we should be doing and should not be doing. How do we measure it, and so on and so forth. My question, I guess, is when you look at the work that you've been doing so far and what you see other maybe companies around doing, do you find that there is a kind of strong commitment, I would say, to sustainability? Or is it something that everybody tries to, not everybody, but that many companies try to claim to be? Because you can optimize your site, right? But I think personally, it feels like sustainability is it's a huge, sophisticated effort that requires actually enormous amount of resources as well. So I guess my question is, where do you think we are there? Is it kind of a thing that people start thinking about now, or do you see that there is a commitment now in place as well from big organizations, big companies that claim that they invest in sustainability when manufacturing, let's say, whatever that they're producing?
I suppose it really depends, and it depends. So specifically when we talk about software sustainability, which is a slightly different than the broader sustainability. So it depends on industry by industry, because some industries are kind of very much in a manufacturing component, and they're measuring the whole sustainability, and the software slice of it is just fairly small. I would still argue that for them, the software slice is probably one of the easier ones to decarbonize than the rest of it. Certain other sectors, like finance especially, is very, like most of them is their compute. They just have like a buildings and very big wages, but like that's like it's mostly their computational side of things. Their software is the biggest driver of their emissions. So it depends sector by sector in terms of how important is like software and the sustainability of software to your total carbon footprint. I'd also say there's a lot of, speak to the other point, there's a lot of, and this isn't like critical, it's just, I think you touched on it before when you're talking about accessibility. It's not like people care. I would argue it's not like people care more. Human behavior didn't change in 10 years. I think people just know more, and the culture has changed, and it's just become normalized, and it's just you know what to do, and it's well understood what the patterns are. I would say where we are with sustainability is people still don't even really know, and we don't even really know. We're still just figuring everything out as we go along. You know, I'm inventing, like the 4Ms didn't exist a couple of months ago. But we're just like figuring this stuff out. And I think over time, what we're talking about now will just become more bedded down. It'll get taught in universities, and then kind of or earlier on in your career, and it'll just become more part of the everyday aspects of your working, because you're right, it is very nuanced, very specific. What you mentioned is actually a very interesting point, because it you know, it comes up a lot, and this is what it's where I see, like, a lot of companies are interested. I would say what differs the company is in the refinement of organizations that have been thinking about this for a lot longer, have just created people inside those organizations that have refined their thinking to the point where they're starting to think about the things you're thinking about,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
They've had the time to think about it. And there's an increasing number of organizations like that, where they've just had the time to fine tune that thought to get to that really kind of questions you're asking. For instance, I work with a travel organization. Like, one of the things we do we develop in the foundation is something called the SCI, the Software Carbon Intensity Specification, which is a way of measuring software. Now, it gives you like carbon per something.
Mhm.
And the way we'd always kind of designed it was like carbon per minute or something like that. Was this organization was the first one that came along and said, you know what, we actually want to do carbon per our user journey. We should never, of course, like, we never really thought about it before, but like they chose because it's carbon per booking.
Mhm.
We would normally have done like carbon per search because it's a search engine effectively, but they went, no, we don't care about the search, we care about the booking. So to them, if they could improve the user experience, as you just mentioned, so that you do, instead of doing 3 searches or 4 searches, they managed to find the flight that they wanted in 2 searches. That removed, that changed. That was the measure that they were looking for. But
Right.
that required, there's like 5 companies in the world, I would say, that have refined their engineering teams, where they're starting to think in terms of those areas. But that's I just think we need time and knowledge, and like forums like this, where we start to kind of really think in those
Right.
areas and really refine our thinking. But we're early stages,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. I also vividly remember when I was growing up, my father used to tell me when I was, I don't know, I
Mm,
was really liking to do something out of
mm.
stone and things like that. I would collect stones, and I
As
think
in
this was kind of,
chisel.
yeah, I
Yeah,
was kind
yeah.
of like really, I wanted to do something out of that.
Mm,
And he said one thing once. I'm not even sure if it was him or it was my mom, to
mm,
be honest.
mm,
But they told me that whenever you have something like raw material, like stone or whatever, you have to put in an incredible amount of energy to make something out
mm,
of it. That
mm,
is an incredible amount of energy. I mean, obviously, when we're creating website digital products, I'm
mm,
just thinking about the amount of time,
mm.
effort, people,
Yeah.
machines, every water, everything that needs to be put in to
Mm,
make this happen, to kind of to
mm,
move that pixel over there. Right?
mm,
That's kind of this incredible.
mm,
And I guess one thing that really inspired me in many ways, I was
mm,
very, very impressed by that. When I heard about this new policy that Microsoft has introduced a while back, they were thinking about how to reward the employees
mm,
based on their performance.
mm,
And they decided to move away from this notion of how many artifacts you produce and how many things you release and whatnot, to
mm,
basically 3 factors. And I
mm.
haven't sent it to you, so I'll be very clear about what I mean here.
Yeah.
The first factor is, what did you create in the last like 6 months?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Second is, what did you reuse that was already
Yeah.
created
Yeah.
over the
Yeah.
last 6 months?
Yeah.
And the third one, that's pretty cool. What of what you created was reused by others within the last 6 months?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess the question I have here is, I think that there is a lot of value, inherent value in, in design, in development, in,
Mm,
just rolling out digital products out there in reuse,
mm.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I guess my question is, you know, the yeah, it's very difficult to me to ask that, because I
Mm,
think like whenever I try to sell ethical design in the past
mhm,
or right design, it never worked because it doesn't really embed inherently in business goals, right? Sometimes
mm,
it even goes against it.
mhm.
And I'm wondering at this point, is there a way to kind of embed reuse
Ah.
just as a part of our process, as a part of how we build, as a part of how we design, for example,
Mm,
because that would probably also improve sustainability, right?
mhm, mhm.
What are your thoughts on that?
So this is you I think you're touching upon kind of the age old, not the age old, it's kind of like this common challenge that a lot of people face. I mean, I've been in enterprise. This is why I think I have like a unique viewpoint. I kind of straddle enterprise and kind of a more activist place. So I can just very pragmatist. I know what it takes to kind of like change organizations, and I want to do that. So like organizations, and this should not be in any way, controversial, but the very nature of them is to make money. That's it. That's their whole, like, unless you're like a for benefit company, or you've specifically structured your way, like fundamentally structured your organization without shareholders and kind of other entities that come into play to kind of have a different structure, or you're a non-profit or something. If you're a for-profit company, you're making a profit, and that just, it's, if you've been embedded in a number of organizations, it's just imbued into everything, into every conversation. It's imbued into every discussion. At the end of the day, if you're not talking about money, you're talking about something which drives money. And that's kind of why then when you talk about sustainability, it just goes up, and like other ethical consideration, it just goes
Exactly.
up against that.
Mm.
And I see a couple of different, I don't have a great answer to this. I see a couple of different arguments that people, put forward to it. And the first step I see people making is trying to make your ethical or sustainable argument fit into the money equation, and like demonstrating that it can actually like be a force for money to help you make money, and you can slot into the equation. I've been tempted to do this at times, and I do occasionally use that kind of argument when there is an actual um uh case for it that is kind of quite strong. But by and large, I find that you don't really, it's just, you always scratch, you'll never really get the kind of adoption that you want at the end of the day. With you'll never, it's like swimming upstream. You might be able to get a
I
few
know what you
strokes
mean.
in,
Yeah.
yeah, a few
Yeah.
strokes in. So you need to find like other avenues to kind of have that conversation. I would say the way I think about it is, and this is a long-term thing, the way, but I would also say that the tide is changing. So it is happening this way. Um, is, I don't put all of my faith in regulation at all. I think it's one of the levers which we need, but it's one of the things which has an impact. Is increased levels of regulation does cause a lot of movement and prioritization inside companies. Not even necessarily, I would say, because of a direct understanding, but just like a general fear of, well, there's regulation coming. Let's create a team that sits down and thinks forward and gets things ready for that regulation. We don't, because you're a CEO, you've got like 14 seconds to think about an issue before you move to the next issue. You haven't like considered, you haven't read the 500-page regulatory report. You're just like, this is a pain coming in the future. I'm going to assign a team to look at it and deal with it. The other one, I would say, is a cultural change, and I don't think we should belittle how significant and important that is to an organization and to the whole world. Is the cultural change, is the fact that you're having this conversation right now, is the fact that your team is the people who are coming into an organization right now. Like we've seen like studies that, like, my generation, the care of sustainability is very minimal, so they're not really going to make too much of a judgment call regarding where they work because of it. Like Gen Z, the new generation, significant percentages of them have said. I think I'll share the stats later. We've got the results, but it's like 30% have like said, if I got the stat right, that they have left the company because of its poor ethical and sustainability considerations. So like, as more and more, it's getting harder and harder to attract new talent into an organization if you just do not have that kind of cultural norm of kind of making sustainability and kind of other areas here kind of priority for you. And that is what I think will ultimately drive a lot of this action, not regulation and not money, is that cultural change. which is why I do a lot of like speaking. I do a lot of, I mean, one of the things we have in the foundation, we've created this training called the Green Software Practitioners course. And everybody thought, because we did the OKRs for that, and everybody laughed at me. And they're not laughing at me so much anymore, because I said that the target was to get 1 million people trained up by the end of this year. And people thought I just came up with that number off the top of my head because I just pulled out an OKR, but it wasn't. It was a very thought out equation. There's 30 million developers in the world. So there's a report by forgotten her first name, a Chenoweth, which is like, if you can change 3% of an audience, you can change the world. So 3% of 30 million is 1 million. And so it's very much around, if you can get 1 million developers or engineers kind of thinking about this space, I think we just snap. I think every single organization makes this a priority, because it's just, you have like changed the cultural consciousness. You want to get deep, you've changed the cultural consciousness of organizations. And the last thing I'll say is that people always say that people treat organizations, and I find it hilarious, they treat organizations as like people. They anthropomorphize organizations
like organisms and stuff.
like organisms, like, oh, that organization's evil and that organization's good, and that organizations are just people. It's just people. And so, like, you change the people, you change an organization. That's all it is. So the real movement is the cultural change is happening around us, which is why you're probably seeing a lot of conversations around this pop up, because the culture is changing. That's what I think.
Yeah. Well, this is, I mean, I will have to think about it for a moment. That really got me thinking at this point. Yeah, and by the way, I will probably have to leave in like 5 minutes. So if you could get ready to step in for me for the last 20 minutes, that would be lovely. In the meantime, maybe one of the, I would like to open it also as a forum, I guess, for wonderful people joining us. I think that you came here because you're interested in what it even means for you, for your work, and how you can actually create more sustainable products or services. So maybe if you have any questions that you'd like to bring up, you'd like Asim or me to answer, we'd be happy to answer and share some experiences on our own as well. So feel free to raise your hand and we'll definitely bring you up in here so you can ask your question, or you can also, of course, just send a message in the chat if you're interested. Anyone? Not yet. Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. Then I'm just going to just jump in one more question that I have before I'm going to leave it to Yaran to continue here. I think one issue that also comes up is who owns sustainability, right? So this is, oops, hold on, my camera just disappeared. So one thing that I noticed is kind of problematic, because on the one hand, again, if you think like, okay, it's developers who should own it, and then it's designers who should own it. But then in the end, if everybody owns everything, then nobody knows anything. Well, hold on,
good
I'm
point.
really bad at this. If everybody owns everything, then nobody really owns anything, right?
Yeah.
And so do you think like, so is sustainability kind of dedicated role that organizations need? Is it a part of design team? Is it a part of product team? Is it a part of business team? Where should it actually live in organizations?
Well, I don't have an answer. I have a lot of, I can tell you where there's a lot of the conversation happening right now. So there's a strong thinking that it will ultimately not, because the measurement is the core of all of it. If you're measuring, and you can really dictate, what you've done is bad or good and make it better. So the DevOps / SRE side of an organization is oftentimes been touted. So sometimes it's called Green Ops or DevSusOps or something like that, or Green SREs, which is kind of the SREs. The way I classify it as SREs are doing more the long-term monitoring, and the DevOps are doing more infrastructure and getting shipping code out there. I don't know if that's an accurate representation of how they feel. That's kind of like one area where there's a lot of attention, because they can have they're the fulcrum points where they can have a significant influence here. I was also the day like just I was giving another talk on our birthday actually, and I was posing this idea, because I think you touched on it earlier on, which is there's a lot in this space could this really even just be like a part of somebody's role, or is there so
It's
much
the
involved
dedicated role.
here, yeah, that it has to be a dedicated role? And I was proposing that maybe there's a dedicated role. I was even proposing like a green software something. I don't know what I don't can't the term, but I was like proposing that maybe this is an industry, this is a role, you know, that you get certified on. And I thought it was a reasonable idea, but a lot of people in the audience were quite offended by that because they cared about the space and yet wouldn't have never gone into that role. So there were UX people in the audience who were saying, well, hang on, I want to feel somewhat responsible for this. And there were product managers in that audience going, I want to feel somewhat responsible, as well as engineers. So I don't know. But I do think it is ultimately it is a very involved role that requires a significant amount of knowledge which you're not taught in other environments to really take advantage of it. But also it's a passion point for a lot of people. So everybody wants to also feel engaged and part of the conversation and part of the solution as well. So maybe I don't know quite how it'll flesh out. Maybe more like and there's also just the last thing I'll say, Drawdown Labs. I don't know if you know about them. They're a great organization that does what they originally did was they calculated all the things in the world that can reduce emissions, and they have a database of it called the Drawdown Labs. But they have an idea which they say every job is a climate job. So it's almost like what you are saying before, which is tragedy of the commons, which is everybody. If it's everybody's job, it's no one's job. But at the same time, they're making the argument that kind of to have the impact that we need, kind of, you know, a lot of people have got to get involved. So I haven't answered your questions. I've made things more confusing, which is usually what I do.
No, you didn't. I think one thing that we tried to do in another project was actually because it was a different story, but it was kind of the problem with UX because there was no UX maturity, and there were a couple of UX designers, and it was just not getting through the entire organization. And so what we ended up doing is kind of injecting a bit of what we called UX QA into the DevOps and QA teams. So they understood what is important, and it wasn't like a checklist, like a PDF checklist with 50 items or so, because they just don't work. But it were kind of really specific points that they had to watch out for, right? And I can see this kind of also being sort of a part where we could kind of sprinkle a little bit of sustainability across different departments, especially in, QA maybe. So then when, there is a red flag coming up, then they can actually prevent that from happening. Well, I think we could speak forever, but I think, Yaran, at this point, I will need to rely on you taking over the space and asking more difficult questions and also bringing up the questions from the audience.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Asim. I'll have to run, everyone.
No worries. Thank you so much.
20 minutes of it. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Vitaly. That was very much in depth again, and I think you managed to confuse Asim good enough. So I can see some question marks in his eyes once in a while. So that's good. Yeah, I'm a little bit more of a simple guy, so I'm just going to ask you some simple questions, Asim. I hope that's okay.
That's fine. I like it.
That's I mean, one thing which always I find difficult in this sphere is, I hear you talk and you immediately you dive down into depth, right? Because that's what you do, because you know stuff about it. Now, I used to run a small little design development agency. What the hell can I do which actually has some impact? Because I somehow always feel that the impact elsewhere is way, way bigger. And and yes, I know the 4Ms, great, fantastic. I'm not gonna do that for every single client project because I run 10 at the same time, right? And it's not the core of what I do. So what can I do?
So there's increased tooling being built. I would say, like, right now we're at the figuring. I think unfortunately there's a lot of people creating tooling, but the baseline stuff is not has not been agreed upon, and so there's no ecosystem forming. It's just a whole, like, dozens of tools, and then it just causes confusion because then you're sitting there going, well, which one should I use? I'll just use Tony's because I met Tony at a conference and Tony's a great person. So, like, like what we're really trying to get to is that ecosystem. And an ecosystem is to create an ecosystem is actually really boring because it means creating standards. Like we think of the web world, like without like nothing. There's just Google's
And you think
solution and
standard people
Microsoft's solution.
are super innovative and right.
Well, you've got to, but you've got to create the standard in order to like create the ecosystem. And so what we're really trying to do now is create like the standards for like measuring. And once you create the standards for measuring, then the tooling will exist. And once the tooling exists, and the whole ecosystem will build up. So that for you, it'll just be like drag and drop, click, 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 I'm done. But like the underlying all of it is measuring. And the thing that I mentioned before, there's this specification called the software carbon intensity specification, which is carbon per minute for this Zoom call and whatever else I discussed before. That has now finally almost at the verge of getting into the ISO, International Standards Organization's body. So that's getting in the catalog there, and that's the first step of like growing the ecosystem. We're building something called the Impact Engine Framework, which again is a bit too low level for you, but I'm just letting you know like what are the groundings for all this stuff. It's basically a framework so that you can calculate the carbon emissions of software using any of the models that exist out there in consistent space. Like right now, if you want to calculate the emissions of your application, there's probably like a dozen different things you can use, but they're all different. Like one of them's a USB connector, one of them's a lightning connector. So when you write your code, you've just kind of got to go like, well, I've got to jam this data into this way to use that one. And then you can only ever do it once because you wrote some crappy Python script that never works again. So what we're working on is kind of building all the standards in the ecosystem. So you can like just collect some data from Google Analytics, dump it in this file. Oh, I want to use this model, drag and drop this model. Okay, there you go. Oh, do you know what? So Tony released a new model. Let's see what Tony's. I'm going to drag and drop Tony. What does Tony's model tell me? Tony's model is more advanced because Tony's model tells me the difference between images and videos and the impact that's having on my website. Whereas whatever's model just treats it all back to the same. So there's lots of different things going on.
So in a way, would it be like a dream for you that like now with, for example, in DevTools or in in Google, the core web metrics, you can see you can see accessibility now, right? Which 4 years ago you couldn't. So within 3 years, there should be sustainability there, and it should be, I mean, maybe not ideal, but at least it would be a massive step in the right direction. Is that something you'd be advocating, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it also just what's really important is this idea of, because I'm always very cautious when people just give me one number. I never want just one number because it's like you don't know what the assumptions were when you made that number.
The thing is, one number is really nice, right? Because
it's nice. Everybody understands it.
Because if I have to make a decision, I go to Google Maps. I try and find a place to stay, and I look at something with at least 4.5, and I know it's crooked.
Yeah.
But
I look at 1 point. I look at 4, and then I look at the reviews to see how many people.
Exactly. So you go and then you look at a couple of the.
You're giving lots of 5-star reviews, and you've only ever given one review in your entire
life.
Exactly.
So you do need to look a little bit deeper, but you still get one number. And at some point I try to, because one thing I dislike is like whenever I want to buy something, I don't know how ethical it's made. Right? There's not a single good metric which shows that, because again, it's super complicated, and there's a couple of organizations who measure it, specifically in the UK, but it's extremely complicated. But I'm still like, if I could be in a supermarket and I could see, hey, this product is made by Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble as a large organization has 2.5 out of 5, and this is actually is for sustainability even lower. Hey, shit, I'm not going to buy that, right? So I think people they do. I mean, like simplicity, and yes, I understand that simplicity is not good, but simplicity is also good, right?
It is. I think the way I'm thinking about it now is that you need to be able to get that top level value, but then also be able to dig into it. And one of the
Yeah.
things I've realized is the way we do a lot of this measurements. Like, it's imagine you gave a customer like a performance metric for their website, but it was just the top level, and you couldn't dig into any details. You couldn't dig into like when this happened or when this happened. It's just that top level. That's kind of where we are right now.
Yeah.
And then you discover that people like are redefining what a second means, or like you're just like, once you dig into it, you're like, well, you know, I know the world says second means like this unit of time, but we decided to use this unit for a second, which is slightly like the, and you're like, well, why did you choose? So there's so much, and when there's so much pressure to get like one number that rules them all these different entities come along to kind of like, I won't say game the system. I would say game the system, because that's what they're there for. They're trying to optimize something for their benefit.
Yeah.
And there's always rational arguments for all of it. There's a lot of pressure, which is why one of the things that I've been thinking about as well, and a lot of people have been thinking about, is this idea of like a measure for reporting and a measure for action, which are two very different things. So like when you start like the number of times I've like sat in a meeting and we're measuring, we're trying to measure the emissions of something, and a lawyer's joined the call, and you're like, why is it? And I love lawyers, don't get me wrong. My sisters, I'm not like, but why is it?
You're not bashing, but just bashing lightly.
Just like, but just like, why?
Yeah.
Why? I just want to know the truth of a situation. Why is a lawyer on the call? It's because when you start reporting something, different pressures come in the mix, and it's more like, well, what? It's not even necessarily like what can we get away with? It's more like, if you're going to say this thing publicly, somebody might sue us, or I have to figure out how much can we defend this number, rather than the truth. Like imagine not being able to report. Imagine performance was a regulatory requirement. Like you just, and it's not developers going, I just want to make the fast experience. It's like, you'd have a different thing. Then people would come along and go, well, what clock are you using? Well, we like to use this clock over here, because that's the regulatory clock.
Yeah.
No,
so I see the point. I mean, you need to agree on certain things so you can actually measure, and it helps improving stuff rather than making it a legal thing. I have something else in mind, which it may sound a little bit negative, but sometimes, you know, I hear you vividly talk about, you know, all the little bits and stuff you can make better. Don't you get like frustrated once in a while when you're working on that and you're trying to educate people, and you're getting a couple percent left and right, and then you hear, you know, Bitcoin farming, you hear you hear, and that's even within the IT industry, and then you hear about, you know, oil industry, and you know, I live in Asia. I mean, the logistics and the amount of waste there. It's of course any impact is good, right? But don't you get like personally frustrated or professionally frustrated if you're working so hard on something and you're making impact, but is that impact, you know, big enough? Are you? I don't know. Just a thought.
Well, I would always I don't think about in terms of big enough, because what I always say is that like if you're in the tech industry, like, so that's why I said like that 1 million people can impact. Did I say that in this call?
Yeah.
1 million people can impact effectively 7-8 billion people in the world.
Yeah.
So like, no matter how small your impact you have there, you've got one of the greater levers of anybody in the world in order to like, you can maximize, you can have a lot more impact than you can have yourself. And in terms of like a lot of these other areas, I would always say like my attitude is always the same. It's happening. I'm not so against kind of crypto as a lot of people in this space are. I think that money seems to have caused a lot of our problems as well. You know, so like, you know,
that's not news. That's kind
news.
of a.
Did you know people like to have a lot of money, and in order to have a lot of money, they like to throw pollution into the environment, and so like. Bitcoin consumes a lot of money, and I've seen the reports, it actually does consume more if it scaled up to the money of the world, it would emit more than normal money. It really would. But at the same time, crypto also holds a benefit of decentralizing enough forces so that you can actually make some of the sustainability work happen as well. So I think it's kind of like you've always got to balance things out a little bit. But my always argument with crypto is like, just it's happening. So figure out how to make it happen more efficient is kind of like my argument.
Yeah.
Is, there's just kind of no
It's
point
kind
getting
of the
don't
swim against the stream, but try and kind of steer the stream.
Yeah, exactly. You can't. You're not going to be able to like ban crypto around the world. So what is it that you can do? I'm deeply pragmatist. I'm not that ideal. I'm probably, I don't know. I actually have no idea if I'm pragmatist or I'm probably a weird balance of ideological and pragmatist. But like I'm very much like it's happening. So what can we do to actually do it? And the same with like the oil and gas. Like I work with a lot of people from the oil and gas industry, and the people I work with, as I said before, like companies are people. I work with people. I work with human beings, and the human beings I'm working with, they have different kind of philosophical feelings about the world, but they do care about sustainability, and they're trying to like do something. And so I will work with anybody who I believe has a positive influence.
And I think that, I mean, that's of course is true, right? And I think a lot of people in a way do care, but I do also think, don't you think there's something, because you say people make the culture, but because there's such a strong, especially in some larger organizations, because a lot of people tend to have certain values, whatever, there's a certain strong company culture where
it's hard.
It's
very
not,
hard.
I mean, you can fire a number of people, but even then, because it's not just the people, it's also the processes, and
the processes,
and I know that people make the processes, but
you
know, I when I was young and naive, etc., I was a change consultant, and oh my god, it's just, you know,
it's hard.
You run, you do a lot of keynotes and change stuff, and you might be able to change a little tiny bit.
I suppose it also depends upon the time scale that you work on as well, and I work on a very different time scale. Like I think there's a great saying that I love, which is people overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in a decade. And I think once you look at, this is why I think it's so important, like these organizations will just culturally change over decades, because the culture around them is going to change over decades. They might not even be around in decades because another startup might have come along and just wiped it out. So that's kind of why I think that, you know, it will change in some of these organizations. It's rare, you know. You see, like Microsoft, I would say, is an organization that's had a transformative cultural shift. And a few other organizations have. I will agree with you. Some haven't, and I would say if you aren't, probably not going to do that well in the near future. So change or die.
That's I mean, I definitely hope that's true. At the same point, let's see, I was in CSR 25 years ago, and I was like, this is the future, everyone's going to do this, and 25 years on, and still, yes, it's obviously has become more important. Money still kind of also rules. Short-term thinking. So I'm a torrential optimist, but sometimes I'm like, what can we do? And that's why it's good to have people like you who will just, you know, relentlessly push on. And I do like your metric of like, you know, if we can influence the 3% of people who actually can make the change, then we can change everything. And I think that's a great start. And I think at some point,
invite me on this podcast again once we do get 1 million people, and if no change happens, I will become I'm bittered and angry, and I'm like, screw this revolution.
Exactly. You stop being a pragmatist and you become the idealist.
There is a lot of people in this space who get more ideological the older they get. So we'll see.
We'll see about that. Anyway, it's I can hardly believe it, but it is already
Oh.
it's 4 o'clock here. Where are you in the world at the moment? I didn't even ask you.
I'm still near London in the UK.
Oh, near
Yeah.
London. All right,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
So relatively near me in this space and time. Are we going to see you somewhere, kind of on stage somewhere this year? Maybe. I know not with
I
us.
think I'm doing, not with you. I think I'm doing API days in London end of the year, and a couple of Intel things, but that's it.
Cool. And kind of the last question, the very kind of a smashing way to end always. What are you very excited about?
Like right now?
Yeah. I mean, you can be very, very, very practical, or you can be a little bit philosophical. But what excites you?
Honestly, like what is absolutely been capturing. I am like just so. I tell you what the forces and the things of the planets have lined up over the last couple of months with a bunch of project standards and other stuff, and the way the world's working to really solve this measurement problem that I've been driving, and solve it in a way. And I've never talked about it on this show so far, but solve in a way that's open and transparent. And kind of like a term that's been floating around in my head for a while is like the eternal optimist. Is what if we could do to sustainability what open source did to software? You know, what if we could do to sustainability? Companies didn't like release software to everybody because regulators told them to. They didn't do it. They did it because the chessboard. Well, the chessboard changed, so that was the only move they could make. Like, what if sustainability did that kind of movement? What if anybody could measure anything in the world in the open? What if you could measure Microsoft's emissions and just release it? How would that change the world? Right. That's what I think. That's what
So the optimist says we're reaching that tipping point. Yeah.
I'd say that, yeah.
Very, very good. Awesome. All right, it was an absolute pleasure to have you here. In the chat, I've kind of summarized some of the small things you said. I'll send some follow-up links to everyone here as well. I want to thank everyone who joined us for joining in. There is some more stuff of Smashing coming by the next couple of weeks and months. We've got some in-person stuff and some online stuff as well. I'm sure Asim will kind of show me some of the stuff that he's been working on, and I'll follow up in the email on that. And thanks again, Asim. And I really do hope to see you and your amazing beard. I mean, I'm always so jealous.
I felt the food in it.
Yeah. I mean, I shaved this morning because the little plucks of hair I had is like, this is gonna dwart me. So I'm happy.
I'll shave it. I'll shave it next time we meet.
Okay, I don't believe you. I don't believe you. But I do like hearing that. Anyway, awesome to see you again.
Thank you all.
And we'll see you soon.
Catch you there. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.